All right, we've got a new Eli Roth movie that just came out, and this one is a holiday slasher called Thanksgiving. And now that we've got 8 movies from Eli Roth that he's directed, I figured now would be a good time to go ahead and rank every single one of his movies from worst to best. Coming in at number 8 is my least favorite Eli Roth movie is The Green Inferno. So this one basically follows these college students who go to Peru to kind of be activists in a way to save like these tribes, these indigenous tribes from basically like corporate America sleazebags who were trying to, ruin their forest to kind of extract the natural resources to get more money, essentially. And as you can probably tell in a lot of Eli Roth movies, there's going to be some young, dialogue, some ridiculous college humor and things like that. And we get plenty of that in this movie for sure. But this movie is gory as hell in the second half. Very similar to a lot of the other Eli Roth movies. The first half doesn't have a lot of like that shock and gore. And then he just basically like says, here you go. I'm going to slap you in the face, with all this gore and people ripping pieces of other people's necks out. Some eyes get gouged out in this one. There's just all kinds of shit that happens in this movie. And this movie has an interesting story. I think there's some social commentary here that could be played upon pretty well. But the problem with this movie, and one of the largest problems with this movie, for me, it's not something I normally like to point out unless it's glaringly bad. And it's pretty bad in this movie, which is the acting and just the overall like dialogue. And the dialogue a lot of times is just, the script and what the director and the other people on the production are telling them to say. But in this movie, it's not just that. The acting in this movie is god awful. It is really, really bad. It sticks out at you instantly. You're just like, this is painful from the very beginning. And it's not like a lot of the other Eli Roth movies where you just feel like they're being told to act ridiculous and schlocky and over the top and like really immature. It's not like that. There is that dialogue, but just the delivery is just not good at all. But of course, like I said, we do get a lot of gore in this movie. I mean, there's a whole dynamic in this movie of cannibals eating people. There's some really beautiful shots in this movie of just like the landscapes and the exotic locations that they go. I think this was filmed in Chile, but it was supposed to be Peru, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this movie is just not good at all. I was bored throughout the entire thing. Dialogue was bad. And just the overall just vibe of the movie, you're like, what am I watching here? Is this supposed to be funny? Is this supposed to be serious? Because the story is serious and the acting is kind of serious, but it's just stupid. All right, and next coming in at number 7 is Knock Knock, which was released in 2015, which is a satirical kind of torture thriller movie. It's a remake of the movie Death Game, which was released in 1977. It's kind of basically like a home invasion movie made for the social media era in a sense. And this movie definitely just made me feel uncomfortable from beginning till end. There's kind of an interesting idea here for sure. It's essentially like the blueprint on how to ruin somebody's life. Just an average guy who's trying to just live his life, be a good dad, be a good husband, and everything literally gets ruined in front of him and he is out of control. I definitely found myself from basically the 15-minute point on when the girls show up at his front door with just this weird, sick feeling inside of me. And the whole time I watched the movie, I felt really uncomfortable. But there's also that point of, a movie is supposed to make you feel something. So I respect that about this movie, how it does definitely make you feel something. But while I'm watching this movie, I'm just like, I don't know how I can enjoy this because I just feel so pissed off the entire time. You've got these girls manipulating Keanu Reeves' character, who's a really good guy in every sense of the word. But you could also make an argument of he let them in, so it's kind of his fault to a sense, and he did what he did. I mean, they kind of forced him, but in the end, he did what he did. But there is that underlying theme in this movie of temptation and just how hard certain temptations can be. There's a little bit of gore in this movie. The first half of this movie, basically nothing happens. That's a big reason why this is at number 7 for me, is because just that entire first half of the movie, I know they're setting something up there, but you are engaged because you are wondering okay, what's their motive here? What's going on? What are they thinking? What are they going to get out of this? Is it money? Or is there somebody else behind this? What's happening here? And you do get a reveal on what they're actually doing. But I feel like it was so slow in the first half of the movie that the payoff just wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. I do think it was interesting how, actually very similar to Thanksgiving, Eli Roth uses social media to kind of like intertwine into the story. And like I said, this is a remake. So he kind of throws in some social media aspects, which is interesting on just how, and he also throws in the aspect of Keanu Reeves' character's in his 40s, and then the girls who show up are like late teens, early 20s-ish. So it shows that dynamic of how those, or just people who are in their early 20s, would treat a situation like this way differently than someone in their 40s. Because in your 40s, you're, I don't know, maybe an older millennial, probably just out of being a millennial. So you grew up most of your life, like in high school and college, with no cell phones, no like real like internet. So you're not used to everything possibly being broadcasted or filmed or recorded. So, and the girls, they use that against them, which is interesting. But this movie, I definitely will never forget. I thought about this movie for days after seeing this. So that's definitely a plus. I mean, it's not a forgettable movie in my opinion, but it just made me feel so uncomfortable, from beginning till end. So I don't really see it as a movie that I'll rewatch. And that's why it's number 7 for me. All right, coming in at number 6 is The House with the Clock in Its Walls, which was released in 2018. And there's some clocks in this movie. There's lots of clocks in the walls. But this movie has a good cast. It's got Jack Black in it. It's got Cate Blanchett, who, I'm not going to lie, I do think Cate Blanchett's overrated. She's not a bad actor, but I think she's overrated. But Jack Black, always loved Jack Black. He does a great job in his role, kind of playing the goofy uncle. The kid actor in this movie does a good job. I think he holds his own, plays that nerd kid who is very likable. You root for him. He's had some trauma and some unfortunate events happen to his parents. And you see that kind of battle with that kind of journey he goes on, It's a kind of a cool setting. It's like this small town in Michigan, which is a cool vibe for like I don't want to say horror movie, but kind of like like a tame, scary movie, Halloween kind of a movie that you can watch here. This movie's a decent little gateway into scary movies for like a younger audience. If you were thinking like a movie like Five Nights at Freddy's, the new one that just came out, is a good movie for like a teen to watch who wants to get into horror. This movie was a pretty good like gateway to horror movie for someone even younger. Like this is like the gateway to Five Nights at Freddy's. So it's got that aspect, which is good. Overall, though, I think the movie is pretty generic for the most part. There's a lot of CGI in this movie, way too much CGI. I mean, this is by far the most CGI in any Eli Roth movie he's ever made, for sure. So lots of CGI. It's almost cartoonish at times. The ending was definitely a miss for me. After everything that went down, after the villain, we see how powerful and strong this villain is and how smart this villain is. They just kind of take him out like that, It's just felt kind of flat to me. It's a decent movie, though. It's not something that's going to offend you in any sort of a way. It plays it safe. It's got some villains in there that you kind of dislike. There's actually one part in this movie which is pretty damn creepy. There's like a transformation part in the movie. I was like, okay, for a PG movie, like that's pretty intense. It's just very generic. Very, very generic. And I think that's what they were going for. But it just didn't do it for me. Now, coming in at number 5 is Hostel Part 2, which was released in 2007. So this has double the budget of the original. And it's very similar to the original, but this time we follow not only the victims, but also the buyers here as well. So this movie's got a lot of like abrupt things that just happen. And you're like, wait, did that just happen? The opening, they kill someone off right away. That's an important character, which is a bold move, but you're also just like, wait, what just happened? The ending's like very similar. The ending's very, very abrupt. You're just kind of like, wait, that's the end? That's all that happened? Whereas in the first Hostel, the end drags on for a really long time, but not in a way that's like not enjoyable. The ending to the first Hostel has all these twists and like crazy revenge moments that are so satisfying and enjoyable. In this movie, they do have some revenge moments that are enjoyable. And you're like, yes, finally got him back a little bit. I love it. Give me some more. They just don't give me any more. It's just very, very quick. The one thing that this movie does lose is it loses the element of surprise that the first movie had. The first Hostel, you don't know what's really going to happen. So you're always kind of guessing or wondering what's going to happen to these characters, who's behind this whole thing. And now it kind of is one of those sequels that's a little bit forced. You know what I mean? They're answering a lot of questions that we're probably not really asking. Yeah, is the temptation of knowing what the buyers are up to and knowing what happens behind the scenes there, is that fun? To an extent, yeah. I kind of enjoy, though, the first movie, how that part's like a little bit ambiguous. But like I said, it loses that element of surprise because you already know what's going to happen. You already know where they're trying to take these people. We're following women this time. We already know like what's going to go down. But it is kind of interesting how once again, Eli Roth kind of dives a little bit deeper into that topic of you could have a normal neighbor who has kids and a wife and a normal job who's a sick fuck. And this movie just dives more into that, kind of like the sick and twisted thoughts that anyone could have. So, next time you're taking out your trash and you're saying hi to the neighbor, just know they might have a human skin, for lampshades in their basement or something like that. So, keep that in mind when you're waving to Nancy down the street. It's interesting that they dive into that. I thought that was cool. But this movie, the ending falls flat for me. There's a lot of gore. Of course. I mean, obviously, this is like peak Eli Roth gore time. So, like, there's a woman who just lays in a bathtub with one of the characters hanging above her and just essentially just gets herself a nice pomegranate shower. And, it's amazing. So we get to see that, so that's one thing. There's another moment in the movie where all I'm going to kind of say is, fellas, it's painful. Let's just put it that way. We could imagine, okay? But yeah, a guy gets his dick cut off. But in the end, Hostel 2 is kind of just more of Hostel 1, but less intense. It loses that element of surprise and tries to do what the first one did to an extent, but in the end, kind of just feels like a forced sequel because of the success of the first movie. All right, coming in at number 4 is Death Wish from 2018, which is an action thriller, which is unique for Eli Roth. It's a remake, actually, of the 1974 movie with the same name. It's based off of a book from 1972. I enjoyed most of this movie. Yeah, at times it does feel like a generic superhero kind of action movie in a sense, sort of. It's not a superhero movie, but it does feel pretty generic, which is not surprising because Eli Roth doesn't have a lot of experience like making action movies. But the cool thing is he can translate some of what he's done and some of what he's famous for into this type of a movie. So just imagine, if you haven't seen it, an action movie where when people do get killed, we get a little Eli Roth in there. So it's pretty bloody. I thought the opening scene was pretty intense, and it kind of made you wonder, like, what is this doctor up to? Because Bruce Willis's character is a surgeon. And you can just kind of tell that there's something else going on there. And then there's a home invasion, essentially, which was a pretty intense part. And somebody dies. And then the rest of the movie, Bruce Willis's character is essentially like trying to get revenge on what happened. Something, though, I thought was a little bit weird, his character's motivation. Throughout the movie, you would think his main motivation would just be to get revenge on who did this to his family first. But he kind of leaves that till last and instead becomes like this, I guess you could say, vigilante or like a Batman kind of a guy, just fighting crime just because he feels like the cops in Chicago are worthless and they're not really helping him. Oh, and you get the guy from Breaking Bad, the uncle cop guy is in this. So immediately when you see him and just with the rest of the story on how it all kind of goes down, you're kind of feeling like this is like a mixture of like Breaking Bad with Batman, because he's wondering who's doing all this stuff, who's like out there killing drug dealers and just kind of taking the law into his own hands. But little does he know, it's right under his nose, because this doctor that he's been investigating the crimes against his family for. The fact that Bruce Willis is a doctor is pretty damn cool, because we get to see him like torture people in the most brutal ways, like a trained surgeon would be able to. Like there's one part where he's like messing with the biggest nerve in your body possible and torturing a guy with it. And then it ends in a very Eli Roth kind of a way. Let's just say, there's a car jack and something gets crushed. It is juicy. The ending to the movie, really any of the home invasion kind of tense cat and mouse kind of scenes were good. I think Eli Roth does those scenes really well and always has. So those scenes were fun. Kind of in an era where movies like Mission Impossible overstay their welcome in a lot of ways. If you've seen Mission Impossible, there's a car chase scene that I swear to God is like 45 minutes of just car chasing. And that's cool, but it's like too much, Cake is great, but if you eat 10 cakes, you're going to be sick and you're probably going to throw up. And in this movie, though, it kind of gets in and out. Like the ending gets in and out, good gore, good action, boom, 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 we're done. Feels kind of concise and pretty solid. Overall, good cast. I enjoyed most of the movie, and that's why it sits here for me. Next at number 3 is Cabin Fever, which came out in 2002, which is essentially a horror comedy. It was Eli Roth's directorial debut. He wrote it with a friend from and kind of his former NYU roommate. And Eli Roth was inspired to write the script for this movie after getting an intense skin infection after working on a farm in Iceland. Cabin Fever is one of those movies where it's like an easily digestible movie for a lot of fans, and it's a good movie to kind of break into the scene on because, yes, it's very, very gory, but it's not too overly complicated. It's not trying to be something that it's not. So people will go into it knowing what it is, and throughout the movie, they'll get what they're expecting to see. And that's essentially what Cabin Fever is. We definitely get to see Eli Roth's first kind of gore on display here. There's a lot of that. I mean, that whole scene with the girl shaving her legs as her skin's essentially like falling off of her is brutal. But yeah, there's a lot of gore in this movie. We get some typical Eli Roth characters, basically just like college kind of frat guys. And then there's a nerd sort of guy thrown in there. Then a bunch of chicks. You get some nudity. Obviously, there's some ridiculousness in this movie. There's like a kid who just sits on a porch and like wants to bite people. You know, screams pancakes and stuff and just randomly will bite people and stuff. This movie's got some comedy in it. You're going to laugh during this movie. But it's just, like I said, it's just a movie that's easy to follow. It's easy to understand. It doesn't do anything crazy. It's just one of those movies that the demographic that they're aiming for is going to show up. It's a lot of fucks and shits and drinking and sex and blood and gore. And they're going to watch the movie and say, okay, I got what I wanted. And then boom, I'm out of here. You know, it's not too long. That's, you know, probably a big reason why the movie was successful. And that's also why I have it in my top 5. All right, coming in at number 2 is Thanksgiving, which was just released last week. So Thanksgiving is an interesting one. We don't have a lot of slashers during the Thanksgiving time. I mean, most of them were like kind of shitty and low budget for the most part. So that's really nice. We get a new holiday slasher to watch after Halloween in between like all of the Christmas movies that we have that are horror related, which is cool. That part is great. This movie, similar to some of the biggest movies that Eli Roth has done, like Hostel and Cabin Fever and some of those, you know, it's an easy plot to understand. You can kind of turn your brain off and just watch this movie. You're going to get a shit ton of gore, of course. This is probably, I'd say this is the best gore out of any Eli Roth movie. I think this is the best gore, the most enjoyable gore to me. There's a lot of crazy gore in this movie. Some of it's a little unbelievable. Like there's a trash can kill. You're like, come on, that would never happen. But it's fun, right? If you've seen the 2007 trailer from Grindhouse that this movie's based off of, you know, there's a trampoline scene. So they bring the trampoline scene back. It's a little bit different, slightly, but still cool nonetheless. But a lot of good gore. There's some cat and mouse scenes. I mentioned that earlier. Like Eli Roth really does a good job. I mean, I've watched all of his movies he's directed up to this point. Honestly, does do a good job with those scenes where the killer's looking for the person. There's a good chase sequence. And in this movie, there is one in particular in John Carver's headquarters, which is intense. I enjoyed that. That was fun. The characters here, though, they're throwaway characters. There's really not a single character here that you're going to remember. I don't even remember the main character, the final girl's name. I couldn't even tell you her name. But so the characters here are basically all throwaways for the most part. There's only one character really that is even likable remotely. The reveal at the end, there's nothing with the reveal that's going to wow you. That's different. It's a whodunit. It's very similar to Scream. This movie's, you know, definitely a love letter to 80s and 90s slasher movies that Eli Roth has always loved ever since he was a kid. That's a big part of this movie. But yeah, the ending is fine. There's nothing really that's going to wow you. But in the end, Thanksgiving tries to do this thing and executes it really, really well. It's a good, solid slasher that I really enjoyed. And honestly, I'm excited to rewatch for sure. And coming in at number 1 is my favorite Eli Roth movie is Hostel, which was released in 2005. So the second movie Eli Roth ever made. And this movie does a really damn good job showing these travelers who are mostly American in a foreign place. They don't know the language. They don't know the people. They don't really know like the things not to do. They're just kind of, just flying by the seat of their pants. There's something pretty damn scary about that when things start to go wrong and nobody believes you. They know you're not a local. There's just something scary about being in a foreign place where you don't know anything and people are starting to disappear. I also enjoy, when we follow Paxton and his whole journey. His friends have all disappeared. He's alone. He was supposed to disappear with them, but just kind of got lucky. And now we get to see him just kind of piece together the clues to try to figure out what happened to them. And like I mentioned in Hostel 2, this movie does have the element of surprise because we don't know when you first saw this movie in theaters what happened to these characters or what's all going down behind this. And just that whole aspect of, it's just rich people around the world paying to torture and kill people is pretty damn crazy. And I think a lot of people say that this movie just kind of is the shock and gore factor is the reason why it was successful, just by kind of making people sick and just kind of, making your mind blown with what they can show on screen. But to me, I don't really feel that way fully. Yes, they're torturing people in this movie, but it fits into the story to me. But great practical effects in this movie, possibly one of the best revenge sequences in any horror movie I've ever seen, ever, which is amazing. That's a big reason why it's number one on the list for me. But this movie also has a lot of nostalgia for me. I remember seeing this movie in the theater and it kind of blew my mind. But yeah, it's got more of that Eli Roth dialogue, which is that frat boy humor. Let's make these Americans look like these typical American jackasses, who just want to get drunk and high. But what's also interesting about this movie is that's who the characters are on the surface. But once their friends start to disappear, especially with Paxton, you kind of do realize there's more to these characters and they're actually pretty good people who really care about their friends and just want to figure out what the hell happened. But damn, I love the ending to this movie, and I just really enjoy this movie. I always have, and that's a big reason why this is my favorite Eli Roth movie he's ever made. All right, everybody, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Right next to me, I'm going to give you a link to my review of Hostel. I'm also going to give you a link to my review of the newest slasher movie, Thanksgiving, so check those out. But anyways, everybody, my name is Matt, and I will see you in the next one.